I scored this little washstand off of Facebook Marketplace. It was only $25, and y'all know I love a little washstand flip. They're tiny, they're cute, and they're easy to do in a short time frame. So let's bring it inside the studio and get to work. This piece has really pretty Gothic lines. I mean, Gothic to me in the shape of the doors and the back plate on the piece. So we are gonna go a little bit dark, a little dark cottage core, if you will, and make this piece over with some Dixie Belle paint. In today's video, I think I'll start off by talking about what a washstand actually is, because even though I like to paint them and I know about them, you might not know exactly what kind of furniture piece this is. So as you can tell by the name washstand, obviously it was used in the home with a basin on top and a pitcher of water. People did not have indoor plumbing, etc. back in the day, so they would use this tiny washstand to hold the tools that they would use to wash themselves. The fancier washstands used to have marble tops, so obviously the water wouldn't erode the wood, and most likely all washstands had a backplate like this one. Even though this washstand in particular looks fancy pants because it has that burled wood on the top, if you look a little closer, you realize that this is actually just painted on. And after about 100 years of wax on top of this small little washstand, I was left with a finish that was not easily removed. So since that heavy-duty wax finish was just junking up my little sander, I grabbed my carbide scraper and removed most of the finish from the top of this piece. But even that didn't tackle this finish, so I decided to bring out the big guns, which means chemical stripper. At this point of the video, I was seriously regretting the thought of actually staining the top of this piece, but since I already started, I wasn't going to stop now. Let's grab the chemical stripper that I have on hand, which just happens to be this one right here by Clean Strip. Do I love it? No. Does it work? Kinda. Let's use it and see how this goes. The reason I don't like a stripper is because, number one, it's smelly and it's messy and it's actually kind of hard to use. You take what's inside of this metal container and you pour it out directly onto the wood surface. I use a chip brush so that I can just chuck it in the bin after and get rid of it, but you're going to cover the entire area where you would like to remove your finish. I find that keeping it kind of thick and chunky does the best work. If it's too thin, it dries out without removing that finish that's on top of this washstand. Sometimes I cover it with a saran wrap or a plastic wrap if I feel like the finish is going to be super tough, just to keep this little stripper a bit wet longer so it does its job. But for this tiny project, I'm just trying to remove the junk and gunk that's on top of the piece. So after this layer sits on here for approximately 20 minutes, I should be able to come back in with a scraper and take most of it off. You can start to see now how that burl wood was just painted on top of a cheap style of wood, which honestly cracks me up because do you know how many people yell at me on the internet about painting burl wood or painting fancy wood? They need to take a second look because most likely that finish was just painted on. Also, who are the weirdos that are yelling at strangers on the internet? Because it blows my mind. I would never go out of my way in my day to make a comment on somebody's video or photo, giving an opinion that you actually don't know anything about. But I digress. Let's get back to the project at hand. Okay, so chemically stripping the top of this tiny washstand, because this is the area where I would like to actually get in here, sand it down to raw wood and stain it. So after the chemical stripper has done its job, you should be able to come in here and pull off all of that finish with a rag or paper towels and your scraper. I do like to make note that I like to use a plastic spatula for this because otherwise you might scratch up the wood even worse. All right, so now we are down to the nitty-gritty of it. The best way that I have found to remove the rest of the junk from the chemical stripper is honestly to use a scrubby soap. If you haven't tried a scrubby soap before, you need to grab one. They're only a couple bucks, and I use them for everything. I think I keep one at every sink in this entire house. So taking this Scrubby Soap, which has a sponge inside, obviously, and a citrus smelling soap on the outside, I'm just going to scrub the entire top of this area where I want to remove any of the leftover chemical stripper. This is going to allow me to get in here and really remove any of the residue that's sticky. If you don't remove that residue, you're going to have to grab some mineral spirits and really get it off. Have I already mentioned that I hate chemical stripper? I'm kidding. I know I have like 5 times already. I'm sorry, but I hate it. It does help you get down to wood that looks like this versus the wood that was really junking up my sander. And now after a sand, it looks like this. Finally making progress on this little piece. Okay, let's choose a decoupage paper for the front panels on the door fronts. Whenever a washstand or a piece of furniture has those kind of inlay panels, I like to use them as tiny little pieces of art. So I'm going to go through my stash and see what will fit. Because I have 2 panels to fit, there obviously are going to be some papers that are not going to work size-wise. But I do know that I want a darker vibe on this piece of furniture. So the darker papers are probably going to be where it's at, and this one is a botanical print. I think because I'm going to go dark cottagecore, this one is going to work the best. The plan will be to fill in those inlay panels with paper. Whenever possible, I like to keep the integrity of the piece by using the original hardware. I'm going to remove this hardware, clean it up with a little bit of Gilding Wax, and put it back on the project. These little pieces of hardware were the old style that kind of screws in and has a nut and bolt system on the back versus the kind that you would screw in from the back to the front. So take them off, clean them up with a little white lightning, and put them aside. And then while you have that white lightning out, get ready to clean your project. A project like this is pretty old, so I'm going to need you to clean inside, outside, back, front, the whole bit. Don't forget the bottom where the spiders like to hang out because you're going to need to clean that too. After a good clean with white lightning, I did do a little bit of a sand scuff and discovered a small fracture in the base of the project. This has been repaired already by another person who owned it before me, but they left a fairly large crack. And if I don't fill in that crack with Dixie Belle's mud to make it disappear, you're really going to see it when I paint on a dark paint color. So unless you're going for a heavy textured finish, I do recommend filling in any big scrapes, any little gouges, anything where any previous repairs have been. This mud, when it's actually nice and dry, sands back to completely flat and you won't even know that it was there. All right, what is next? Well, now that you have cleaned and prepped your piece, you need to do a little bit of an assessment. Does this piece look like it might have tannins and bleed through? Is it stinky? Well, then you're going to need bonding boss. Here's the plan for my bonding boss. Since I'm only worried about bleed through in these small little inset areas, this is the only place where I'm going to apply it. I want you to think about tannins and bleed through kind of like the colors of paint you're going to choose. If you think tannins and bleed through will be shown on a project and you're choosing a light paint color, then you really should prime the entire piece with Bonding Boss. For this project, I'm only going to be painting the panels with a clear coat that might pull the tannins through, so this is the only place where I'm going to apply it. So the only place where there's going to be light areas on this entire project is through the paper on the doors of this piece. That means I only need to prime the spot where that paper is going to be. The rest of the piece is going to be painted in a nice, deep, dark color. I haven't really decided yet, but probably a black or a close to black tone, and tannins and bleed-throughs doesn't show on a really dark color. Plus, if I did the entire project in this bonding boss and then wanted to paint a nice dark color over top, I'm going to use a heck of a lot more paint. So work smarter, not harder, and only apply the bonding boss where you need it. Let's work on the hardware. Now this hardware is pretty cheap. I'm not gonna lie, this whole washstand looks like it's fancy pants, but I'm gonna tell you something. It's actually a budget-friendly piece from at least 100 years ago. That means tin is on the back of this hardware. It's not even like full brass. So in order to paint it, I just want to fresh it up with a little bit of gilding wax. Since gilding wax is oil-based, you can put it on anything and it's going to dry up nice and rock hard. So I'm going to apply it with a small brush over top of all of the hardware, making it, number one, look kind of uniform and the same color, but also to bring it up to date and give it a fresh new look. This is also a super helpful, handy way to update hardware that's maybe going to be in the entire piece, but that originally wasn't the same color. Like if you were going to add new hardware to the doors or change something up. By adding gilding wax and changing all of the hardware to the same color, really helps it look more uniform and complete. Let's work on the base of this project. Now, the plan is definitely dark. The wood itself is not in pristine condition, so that most likely means I'm going to do something with a little bit of texture. Because dark paint tends to show off every little nick, scratch, or mark on your project. That means the texture is going to hide what I'm going to do. Most likely when you see me using Terra Clay paint, I've already applied a nice dark base. Whether it be silk paint or chalk mineral paint, it really doesn't matter. I tend to use black as a base coat for all of my Terra Clay paint so that if I do pull back my Terra Clay paint to show what's underneath, black is going to be the color that you see. So this base coat is basically just like my primer for the paint that I'm going to be adding on top. The color that you see me using here is called Anchor. This is actually silk paint. And if you ask me why I chose silk paint, I'm not gonna lie, it was the closest black that was close to me on the floor. It really doesn't matter if it's chalk mineral paint or silk paint as your base coat. This step in the process is basically just to cover all of the wood, minus those little panels that you see on the front. I'll be keeping those in that gray primer, and the reason for that will be to show the paper when the paper is wet, and when you seal it, the light colors on the paper show the color underneath. So keeping it in a nice light form on the inset panels is going to help that paper really pop. And you can see me here painting around the hinges and going right over top of the area that I fixed with my Dixie Belle mud. I really feel like using Terra Clay paint on a piece like this is going to give it a little bit of drama, as well as hiding any of the little marks and little nicks and scratches that you see on the piece. Because Terra Clay paint is thicker in value, it's really going to help me hide any of the damage that's on the project. So let's talk a little bit about what Terra Clay paint is. It's number one, my favorite paint. I really, really like Terra Clay paint because it gives you the option to achieve a finish that I just can't get with chalk mineral paint or silk paint. This paint is thicker in value, and when you see me apply it, like right here, I'm using the color Black Onyx. I stab it onto my project. That's as much as I can explain it. It's not painting, it's not a smooth finish. I'm literally stabbing it on, dabbing it on, and creating little peaks and valleys with the texture of the paint. Because this paint is thicker, when you look in the can of Terra Clay paint, it's thick like pudding, and it's going to keep those little peaks and valleys on your project, which gives you the ability then to have a textured piece of furniture that hides the damage on the piece versus a smooth piece of furniture. I am using a natural fiber brush. I really like to use a natural fiber brush versus anything that's smooth because I really want to keep that texture. So right now you see me taking the black onyx and the purple elderberry and kind of smushing them together, as well as picking out all of the fibers that fall out of these brushes. It's not that the brushes are faulty, it's the fact that I'm so super hard on them by pushing them into my project and stabbing them. I really loosen the bristles a lot. So yeah, you can pick out those little bristles while you're painting or let them dry and just pick them out after they're dry. Either way works. It's a very slight difference between the purple that you see me adding here and the black, but when this project is finished, you're going to see the definition and the detail just a little bit more. So since this paint is reactivated by water and right now it's wet, they blend together so super easy. If you're afraid of blending, I totally recommend Terra Clay paint because you're gonna find it's the easiest way to ombre blend your paint. The colors go together very, very easy, much easier than chalk mineral paint. And be aware that this paint does dry very matte. It's super flat, like to the point where I feel like it sucks in the light. So the color that you see when it's wet right here is the color that it will look like when it's sealed. When it's dry and you haven't sealed it yet, it's going to look very flat. So for the base of this project, I did a combination of onyx and elderberry smushed together to create an ombre blend over the entire piece. And since Terra Clay paint does not have a brown color, you can see me here using a little bit of coffee bean to just give that brown added touch to the black. I don't want it to be one color finish. I want it to look interesting. And this is what Terra Clay paint looks like when it is dry. All right, it's time to work on the decoupage paper. And I didn't edit these clips because this is actually kind of funny. I need to cut the paper to size, right, to fit into these two panels. And I grabbed my scissors, and these scissors really didn't cut. I'm hard on my brushes, I'm hard on my tools, and I'm hard on my scissors. So now you see me with take two. I mean, it's freaking paper. It shouldn't be this hard to cut, but all of my scissors are done. So if anybody wants to start buying me presents for Christmas, I need new scissors. It ended up taking me 3 different sets of scissors to cut this darn paper. I'm not kidding. It really was that difficult to cut paper, which is kind of funny, so that's why I left it in. Anyways, moving along. Cutting this paper directly in half. That's going to give me enough paper to cover the inset panels on both doors. Now, some of you might be asking me, why am I not tracing the inset panels and cutting out the paper exactly to size? I'm going to tell you a little secret. I suck at that. I really, really cannot cut paper exact to size. I don't know if it's my ADD and mathematical equations or if it's just the fact that I can't do it. I do it a different way, and I'm going to show you how. So I'm going to show you the way that I do it. This is my decoupage hack to getting the perfect fit every time. Number one is to cut your paper that's going to fit the inset panel, not directly to the inset lines, but just enough to go over top of the edges. So this piece of paper right here will fit the inset panel. Next up, you're going to use your Dixie Belle's clear coat as a medium to apply your paper. Why do I use clear coat as my medium rather than Mod Podge or wallpaper paste or whatever else people like to use? Because it's a water-based clear coat, it allows me to make mistakes and fix them easily. Because that medium is water-based, it's very easy to pick up and put back down your paper if you make a mistake. If I used wallpaper paste or Mod Podge, the paper is going to rip when I pick it up and move it around if I make a mistake, which generally I do often with decoupage paper. So step one is to overly apply a Dixie Belle clear coat. I like to use Satin to the area where your paper is going to stick. Be a little bit, heavy-handed. Be a little liberal with your application, because the thicker that is, the easier it'll be to move your paper. The second step is to mist the back of the paper with a little bit of water. Misting the back of the paper is going to make it stretchy. Now I'm going to take the paper and just stick it down to the area where I want it to be. Is it adhered to the edges? No. But is it nice and smooth in the middle and pushing out so I can cut it with a knife and get it the exact size? That would be yes. And I use a balled up piece of saran wrap or plastic wrap to smooth my paper. Doing it this way allows me to get a wrinkle-free finish and push that paper out to the edge and really get it adhered to the piece. Pushing that paper down and getting it as close to the edges as possible without having to cut it yet. You don't want to cut this when it's wet. I'm going to actually let this sit and get dry. Once it's dry, I can take a sharp knife and cut it exact to the edges. And now I'm going to do the other side of the panel, and then it's going to be done in the same way. Apply a very thick amount of satin clear coat to the area where you want your paper to stick. Then you're going to spray the back of your paper, and you're going to use your saran wrap to smooth out any wrinkles. I guarantee if I would have done it the other way in trying to exactly measure and put the paper in and fit it to size, I would have had a failure somewhere. So this way just allows me to really get that paper down and then cut it exactly to size when it's dry around the edges. I had extra paper here from the piece that I cut, so rather than have it go to waste, I'm going to apply it to the sides of the drawer. This is just going to give me a little pop of color. When somebody opens the drawer, it's going to really pull the whole piece together. Again, applying it in the same manner, clear coat, spray, stick it down, use your saran wrap to smooth it out. Again, overlapping my edges like this allows me to come back in with sandpaper or a sharp knife after it's dry and get an exact fit. Okay, it's been a little bit and my clear coat has dried, so now I can take my sharp knife and come in around the edges and start to cut my paper. I'm going to be doing 2 cuts. The first cut is to get it pretty darn close to the edge, and then the second cut is to get in there and actually do the exact edge. Of course, after it's being cut, you're going to want to add another layer of clear coat around the edges to seal it up. I waffled back and forth with deciding to use black on the top versus a walnut. And in the end, I'm glad that I waited because I think if I would have done it black, which was my original thought, this entire piece would be too dark. I ended up choosing the color walnut, which is a medium brown. It's not as dark as espresso, and it's definitely not as light as, say, a cedar with orange tones. It's a nice kind of ashy walnut that really complements any wood. So let's apply this to the top of our little table. My gel stain didn't have the lid put on correctly, surprise. So that meant that there was a slight film on the top of my gel stain that I needed to break through in order to get through to the fresh product underneath. So dip in your applicator pad. The reason I like to use a terry cloth applicator pad versus a brush is that I'm building layers on top of this really kind of heavily damaged wood, hiding all of the flaws. Wiping this on in the direction of the wood grain. If I need to be a little heavy-handed on one spot where the damage is showing through, I can do that with gel stain. This is the perfect finish for anything that you want to kind of hide a damage or mark on wood. Since gel stain can be applied on raw wood or existing finishes, you can really build up the coverage to get the look that you would like. This is an oil-based product, so be aware that it might take a little bit longer to get dry if you're working in humid conditions. For this project, I used 1 even coat of walnut gel stain. Since the inside of this piece is a little bit old, it's stained. It's not dirty, it's stained. So to hide some of those stains and make it look fresh for a new owner, I decided to use Apothecary inside of the drawer. This color will actually complement the front of the paper really well. Around the edges where I have cut the paper to size, I added a little bit more clear coat just to really seal those edges down and make sure that my paper was adhered well. To seal the base of this project, I'm going to be using Terra Tough. This is a shinier finish than the Terra Matte, and it's going to seal in my paint and give it that fresh look again. Because remember, when this dries, it looks quite light and matte. Any of the areas that you see on the front of this piece that have a lighter finish, that's where I've taken a piece of sandpaper or a damp rag and pulled back the paint to show the wood grain underneath. You can also use that Terra Tough to actually seal in your decoupage paper as well. I went over top of the entire base of this project. To seal the top of this piece where I've applied my no paint gel stain, I like to dampen a blue sponge. This is a nice smooth sponge that's going to give you a nice smooth finish. Gator Hide has just been released in 2 new finishes. There's an eggshell and a satin. I really do recommend using the blue sponge to apply your Gator Hide and overlapping your strokes. You're going to get the best finish when you use this tool. We are almost finished this project. I feel like this one took a long time, but I need to add a little bit of gilding wax to the edges for shine, as well as covering the small little lip that you see on the top of the drawer. This just gives it a finished look, a more polished look, and it doesn't really junk up the sides of your drawers that when you're opening and closing them. Since this is a thin layer, not added layers of paint, the drawer still opens and closes easily. I put back on the original hardware onto this project and then made sure to hammer it in because it really was a tight fit because of the paint. I did add one more small detail. The front doors didn't close and latch, so I added a magnetic lock to the front so that when you open and close the doors, they do catch and latch properly. I am loving the new look on this old piece. This washstand has been updated to a cottagecore academia vibe, and I think that it's going to fit very well inside somebody's home. Thanks for watching and hanging out and painting with me today. If you wanted to try any of the products that I use in this video, I have linked everything in the description below. And make sure you hit like and subscribe so you can see next week's video. I post a long format video every Saturday.